Coming up on the Eastern Conference edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, the Tampa Bay Lightning have re-signed one of their own to an 8-year extension that doesn't kick in until 2024, and the NHL Network has released its top 20 defensemen. Who's in the right spot and who is in the wrong? That's all coming up. You're listening to the Locked On NHL podcast, your team every day.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the August 23rd, Wednesday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. I'm Ross Levitan from Locked On Senators, alongside Mike DiStefano from Locked On Maple Leafs. We appreciate you making Locked On your first listen on this Wednesday. We appreciate you subscribing wherever you download your podcast. We are also free and available on YouTube. Mikey, it is the time of summer where rumors are going into next season. Who's got better, who's got worse, and the Tampa Bay Lightning are right in the middle of the discussion. Just 1 year removed from deep playoff run, and now they extend Brandon Hagel. 8 years, $6.5 million. How much does this move the needle to you? I know he's already signed next season, but how about for the next 5 years for him?
I don't know if he does move the needle all that much for me, to be honest with you. Like, I think he's a good player, and I don't know if it was, if this is a terrible contract. I think we'll look at this deal and at the end of it say, okay, maybe it was, decently fair. The 8 years is a little long, I think, and that's a little bit much for a player that I wouldn't identify as a core piece. To me, Brandon Hagel's probably, just a good secondary piece, but like a really good one. And they've lost a few of those over the years. So maybe they identify, a younger player like Brandon Hagel, who's only 24, and says, okay, we want to include him into our core as like that main secondary piece of offense. Cause they've lost Andre Palat, who's gotten older, and then he left via free agency. Same thing happened with Alex Killorn. And then they've had to trade out some pieces as well to fit within their cap structure. They clearly identified a guy who they liked, and they thought the price was about where they were comfortable to go with him at $6.5 million. And, now Brandon Hagel is going to be a long-time Tampa Bay Lightning.
Yes. And he's been a Tampa Bay Lightning for the last little while after they gave up not one, but 2 first-round picks to get him midway through, not this past season, but the one before. Struggled to adjust right away, only had 7 points in 22 games, and then went on in the playoffs to, he was a decent role player, but for their run to where they were, I don't think that, 6 points, 2 goals, really what you'd expect for the kind of product that they gave up for him with those 2 first. This year, 5 points in that series against Toronto, 30 goals, which surprised me when I looked it up. I figured he would have been 25, which he's done in the past. Last season, hitting 25. But yeah, more offense than I expected from a guy who, followed from afar, and, a plus player, a guy who got a couple, later on Selke votes. But when we look at the breakdown of this contract, if you're watching on YouTube, I've got it pulled up right here. Starting in the 2024-25 season, tons of signing bonus in the first 2 years, 7.18 in the first, 6.5 in the second. And then the rest is just a little bit slightly below each and every year salary wise until the final 5 years of it is 5.45. So full no move clause in the first 2 UFA years. He would have had 2 RFA years before that, and then it turns down to a 16 team. So kind of gets to control his destiny, but still gives Tampa some flexibility should they decide to move on from him in the later years of that deal. Where do you see the Tampa Bay Lightning, I think, is the bigger question in all this? Like, moving the needle is one thing, but how quickly do you think that their core that won them those cups is going to cast away? Because this almost feels like, they saw that he's younger than Alex Killorn, but Killorn signed for almost the same ticket in Anaheim.
Yeah, he did. But, you can get more years out of him, right? Like, if they signed him for 8 years, you'd have to think, he should be able to be a productive player throughout the majority of those 8 years. I will say this, there seems to be a bit of a misconception. Some people think this deal's kicking in like this year, and he'll be 32 or 33 when the deal is up. He actually won't even play a game under this contract until he's 26 years old. Fast forward 8 seasons after that, guess he's going to be 34 when this contract is done. So can he give you $6.5 million worth of value all the way through till his 34th season? Potentially. And the only reason why that is if you're forecasting that far ahead, $6.5 million won't be anywhere near the percentage of the cap that it looks like it would be in today's NHL. We're thinking 8 years down the road, we're way through COVID and the pandemic, hopefully, and we see this cap explode in a couple of years and continue to ascend and climb. That $6.5 million will probably be, they're hoping pretty much what a middle six NHLer makes at that point. And that's probably what Hagel will hope to be in the last couple of years of that deal. But in the meantime, they're going to need him to provide offense as a top 6 player. And I think he could do that. And he's not terrible defensively either. If you actually go and look at his takeaway numbers, he was 4th in the NHL this year in takeaways, ahead of your boy, Mark Stone, also, I might add. And 4th, even when you break it down and do per 60 numbers at 5-on-5, all the great numbers you want to look at. So, he's a guy who can not only get 30 goals in a season, pretty staunch defensively as well. So a good two-way player for the Tampa Bay Lightning. They're hoping that he could be that for many, many years.
And it's a continuation of Julien Brisebois identifying who he wants to be a part of the core and grow with this current Tampa Bay Lightning team. Last year, it was the trio they signed on the first day of free agency. Just like with Braden Hagel, it was players that didn't need the extensions for that summer, but for years to come. Anthony Cirelli's contract kicks in this year at $6.25 million. He signed that ticket. So did Eric Chernak, and so did Nick Paul. And I should actually go further to say Braden Point. Lots of red arrows on Cap Friendly for contracts that extend past the next 6 seasons. Mikey, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them. But then you look deeper, and they're all core players. Sorry, the final guy who signed last July, that same day, was Mikhail Sergachev at $8.5 million. We'll get to where the NHL Network ranked him in their list of top defensemen. But, man, for better or worse, Julien Brisebois has his long-term core. It's Mikhail Sergachev. It's Eric Chernak on the back end. Up front, it's Braden Point. It's Anthony Cirelli, Nick Paul, and Brandon Hagel, all locked in for 7 or more seasons.
I will be curious to see what happens with the captain. He's going into a contract year. He's making $8.5 million this year. He'll be 34 years old when that contract expires. Do they still look at Steven Stamkos and think to themselves, he needs to be part of this core, needs to be part of this future with these contracts kicking in? That's a player who I look at and I'm kind of circling and wondering, is Julien Brisebois, is he ballsy enough to cut ties with Stamkos as he gets older? Or, is Stamkos, now that he's got his cups, is he willing to maybe take a pay cut to remain a Tampa Bay Lightning for life? That's going to be interesting next summer to see how that whole thing unfolds for him.
Steven Stamkos could sign a league minimum contract for next season and reach $100 million in career earnings. He's 500,000 away. So don't think he's going to be pinching pennies when he looks at what kind of core is in Tampa and how important he's been. Even back to the bubble, the 1 game, 1 goal, and spending 3 months in isolation.
I'll say this. As long as that team has Vasilevsky playing at that elite level that he is, the best goaltender in the NHL, in the world, that team is always going to be competitive, and they're always going to strive to win a Stanley Cup.
But they do have an Achilles heel. I want to touch on that after the break. Then we're going to get to the NHL Network's top defenseman. And is it peculiar that some high-profile youngsters are still without a contract, with less than a month till training camp? We'll discuss all that next. You're listening to the NHL Locked On Eastern Conference edition on August 23rd. Today's episode is brought to you by Bird Dogs. Bird Dogs is an amazing product, so comfortable through and through. We get Bird Dogs thanks to our sponsorship with the great people at Bird Dogs. They sent us joggers, unbelievably comfortable. You look at the liner inside, fits way better than regular joggers. And that's saying something because, that's one of the most comfiest pieces of clothing you can own. Well, how about shorts? You want to be active. You want to play tennis, golf, hit the links with your boys. And while you're out there, you don't want to be worrying about making sure you're comfortable by stretching out and doing all these movements that are just wasting time and frankly uncomfortable. So use Bird Dogs. Bird Dogs has fixed this issue by inventing cloud knit fabric that looks just like khakis, but stretches. So you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. I'm wearing my Bird Dogs right now. Anti-stink sweat wicket fabric keeps you cool and dry all day long. So go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL and enter the promo code LockedOnNHL for a white tech hat with your order. That's such a sweet deal. I wear my tech hat all over the place. It's birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL for a free white tech hat with your order. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off. We promise. Welcome back to Locked On NHL. Make sure you're subscribed to Locked On NHL wherever you get your podcasts. We have local experts on the biggest stories. It's your team every day. Shout out to the everydayers out there who check us out at Locked On Senators and Mikey over at Locked On Leafs. Whenever a team in the National League makes a trade, well, you can always get instant reaction from the best of the Locked On world. So make sure you subscribe to all of the great 35 podcasts on the NHL channel. We'll get to the NHL network shortly, but Mikey, I'm looking at this defensive core for the Tampa Bay Lightning, and every team in the East that's in this dogfight has at least a good top pair. So I'm looking at Hedman and Sergachev. I'm saying they can compete with any other top pair on the Eastern Conference, but you need depth. We see it year after year, and I don't know if they have it. Chernak's a good defenseman, but after that, Nick Perbix, Zach Bogosian, Calvin DeHaan, Darren Radish. These aren't names that are, moving the needle for me.
No, and they really did get exposed in that first round loss to the Toronto Maple Leafs. I mean, I had a firsthand view of it. That was very much the Achilles heel. Toronto took it to those young defenders, Nick Perbix, Darren Radish. The game-winning goal went off of Darren Radish's skate, and they made a couple of boo-boos throughout the series, and they were exposed a little bit. Not to say that they can't get better. Like, I think that there is some promise for Nick Perbix specifically, and I think they liked what they saw to Darren Radish. But again, I don't think it's necessarily thinking that these guys could be top pair or top four defensemen, just that they are NHL defensemen. And the problem is when you're going for a Stanley Cup, you can't just have a bunch of guys, right? You've got to have studs up front in your top pair, top four. Shoot, you got to have some pretty darn good guys on your third pair if you're going to win a Stanley Cup. I mean, just go and look at, the guys who did it on Vegas. Like, White Cloud is a stud. Hag is a stud. Those guys are good defensemen and only getting better. And that's not to mention, obviously, the Martinez and the Shea Theodore and the Petrangelos that also was on that Stanley Cup winning team. And we don't even need to talk about, the depth that they had on the Colorado Avalanche as well last year when they beat the Tampa Bay Lightning. So, we all know that defense wins championships, and I'm it's not a frightening 6-man rotation they have for the Tampa Bay Lightning up on the blue line.
Yeah, I think they did a good job replacing Ian Cole, let's say, who's actually steady in a depth role with Calvin DeHaan, but still, otherwise, it's basically the same decor. Gone is Cal and Foot, but other than that, I'm assuming, just expecting Darren Radish to step in and play more than 17 games and contribute more at that. So, I mean, huge pressure on Mikhail Sergachev, I think, to play up to the $8.5 million that he's making. If he can do that, then, I mean, now I can be convinced, especially if they're able to just find a more complementary piece and have Hedman and Sergachev on different pairs. Now you can spread out the top four. And, well, yeah, depth could be something maybe you'll look to outscore, or, as you mentioned, you still have Andre Vasilevsky, who I'm sure appreciates a good decor in front of him. And speaking of defensemen, the NHL Network released its top 20 list of defensemen, and that actually comes on the heels. I wonder, are they poaching content from us? Our extremely original idea a couple weeks ago to rank the top defenseman in the Eastern Conference. Mikey, say it ain't so. But when we look at what the defensemen were for us last a couple weeks ago, like a lot of them were on this list. The Victor Hedmans of the world, the Adam Foxes, that was our top pair. Who else was up there in the Eastern Conference if you filter through that on this list?
Yeah, I mean, you look at a couple of guys who are on the East in the list that they gave us. I think Charlie McAvoy makes a lot of sense. He came in as the number 6 defenseman in the NHL, according to the NHL Network. I mean, I think we all can appreciate what Charlie McAvoy can do. And, he's going to have to obviously bring his game to another level. I know that he can't score goals and replace the ones that Krejci and Bergeron had. But if he can try and stop them, then perhaps that'll be, best case scenario for the Boston Bruins, who are going to have a bit of an interesting season. Rasmus Dahlin coming in at number 7. He had his breakout season last year for the Buffalo Sabres. He was incredible for the first 4 or 5 months of the season. He was right there in the race for Defenseman of the Year. And, at some point in his career, I believe he's going to win one. He is that good. He unlocked something last year. If he can build on that, I think he'll be right back into the mix again this season. So that makes a lot of sense for him to finally get the recognition coming in as the 7th best defenseman in the NHL. Erik Karlsson technically was put number 8 because now he is in the East as a member of the Pittsburgh Penguins, obviously winning the Norris Trophy a season ago. And, you got to go all the way down to number 12. The next player was Dougie Hamilton of the New Jersey Devils, comes in at number 12. Jacob Slavin coming in at 14 for the Carolina Hurricanes, arguably the best shutdown defensive defenseman in the National Hockey League and has been for a few years now. Brent Burns, his partner, his in crime out in Carolina, comes in at number 16. Mikhail Sergachev at 17 was interesting. I did not expect to see Mikhail Sergachev show up here on this list of top 20 players in the NHL, or top 20 defensemen, but he comes in at number 17 ahead of guys like Drew Doughty and ahead of guys like Shea Theodore. But Brandon Montour was the final Eastern Conference defenseman that rounded out the top 20. He was ranked at 19. Yes, he came off a big career year last season with 73 points. But to me, that one was a little surprising to see as well.
Yes. For me, the most surprising one, maybe I could say Brandon Montour. I'd appreciate that, but I didn't realize Brent Burns was still putting up points. And I mean,
Dude,
maybe
good year
in that system that the Hurricanes play that's so on top of you, no space or time when you're coming defense. That kind of goes into Burns's counter-attack mindset. So I think the league's in a better place when Brent Burns is playing well and in important moments. He's so much fun to watch.
Absolutely. And you think about it, like Tony DeAngelo had a 60-point season the year prior in Carolina. They shipped him out. They brought him back, but they shipped him out at first, and then in came Burns to take over that slot, and he is a better player than, DeAngelo is. So, of course, he was going to put up a little bit more offense. But, oh, yeah, that guy had a big resurgence in Carolina last season. I'll be curious to see if he can keep her going later into he's 38? Yeah. 38 years old, I think.
But no sign of slowing down.
Well, there were signs in San Jose. There were signs, but he revived it last year. Hopefully, he can keep it going.
No, I'm just gonna say, knock on wood, he has played in every game for the past 9 seasons, and has played in 761 consecutive regular season games. It's second in active players behind Phil Kessel.
Wow, who is still in need of a contract, by the way.
So is he an active player? Probably still celebrating with that silver thing.
Hey, man. I mean, it'd be a good way to go out. You do have the record. You go out with a cup. Might be what Phil does. Considering he wasn't even really playing.
3-time champ.
3-time champ. Yep.
Pretty impressive.
We'll see what happens with old Phil the Thrill.
If we had another hour on this show, we could discuss Hampus Lindholm, who's probably my favorite defenseman to watch. The fact that they have him and McAvoy on different pairs is like such a cheat code. Like it's Carlo and Lindholm, just perfect shutdown pair, like unreal. So yeah, there's my minute for Hampus Lindholm, who I still can't believe was available for what he was last season. He finished 4th in Norris voting, so I guess he is getting the respect that he deserves. Hey, Battle of Ontario. How would we rank the top 5 defensemen playing in Ontario right now?
Oh, man. Put me on the spot here.
Me too.
Here's the thing, okay? I think there's some promise with a couple of guys in Ottawa. So, like, are we ranking based on promise or, like, right now? Had to win one game right now.
I think expectations going into the entirety of next season. So taking in a bit of growth, because to me, Jake Sanderson's number 1 on both teams. He's that good. I really think that we're going to see this year.
I think he becomes the best out of anybody on those squads. I don't know if it's as early as this season, though. I might put the pause button there for a year or two, but I think he does become a number 1 or top pair defenseman at the very least. I agree with that.
So fun to watch, man. Like it's all the little things with him. And the NHL Network did a little segment on him. It wasn't with this countdown. I'm not advocating for him to be a top 20 defenseman. I will pump the brakes there for sure, Mikey. But when I watch him play and look at 32 points, that he only had 5 less 5-on-5 points than Lucas Raymond last year. That was a little surprise. Had some fun with Wings fans with that one. But no, just to me, but I can hear an argument. So who's your top guy then?
I mean, it probably would be Mo. I think Morgan Riley I put in at number 1, then Chychrun, and then Sanderson. I think Sanderson comes in probably after Chychrun. Yeah, I guess Shabbat's up. You know what? Who would you put there? Shabbat, where would you fit him into this ranking?
Me, him, and Morgan Riley are pretty interchangeable because they're both offensive defensemen. And funny enough, Shabbat played 3 more games, but they had the identical amount of points last year. That's it. That's interesting to me. But obviously each have their defensive liabilities.
Yeah.
So I mean, to me, like, is Mo the number 1, no doubt, for you on the Leafs?
Yes. On the Leafs, yeah, for sure. Sure. Like, I can hear the argument for Shabbat, to be honest with you, but I don't think there's anybody there is nobody better on the Leafs. I mean, you can make the argument, I guess, TJ Brody as like a defensive guy. He's a more reliable player, but someone who's got the best ceiling, the best potential to give you the most in a game, I'd say it's Morgan Riley. I mean, we saw him in the playoffs too, really dial it back. He was fantastic in the playoffs. Like, that guy looked like a Norris caliber defenseman in the playoffs. I'm hoping that he can bring it forward into another season, because if he played like the way he did in that first round against Tampa, if he plays that way next season, he could fit his way into the top 20 list next year. I fully believe that.
Huge year for both Morgan Riley and for Thomas Chabot. If I'm doing my top 5, though, I'll go Jake Sanderson 1. I'm actually going to go a tie for 2, but I'll give a slight edge to Morgan Riley. And then I'm going Thomas Chabot, and then I'm going Jake Chychrun. I just want to temper the expectations a little bit on Chychrun. And then I don't know if this is a surprise to you, but I'm going with Jake McCabe here at 5, a guy we haven't even mentioned yet. I think that
no chance you can put McCabe over Brody. Not even close. Come on, not even close.
I don't know.
Not even close.
I'm just not that impressed when I watch Brody, but I guess I haven't appreciated his game. You think
Jake McCabe was on the ice.
Took a ton of penalties, I will say that.
No, there was a stat that I had he was on the ice for something like 71% of the goals in the Tampa series, something like that. Like, it wasn't pretty. He was on the ice for like 11 goals in that series.
Yeah, wow, -7 in 11 games. He was good in the regular season for them, though.
He was okay. He was good. Yeah, he was all right.
Where'd you put Liljegren in this conversation?
He still has some steps to go. Like, I would put Liljegren.
Based on what you just said about Jake McCabe, like, who would you have between those two guys?
That's a toss-up, honestly. Those two to me would be a toss-up.
Would you put Eric Brandstrom and Artem Zub? How would you put all 4 of those, throw them in a blender?
I'd have Zub. I think I'd have Zub ahead of both those guys.
Yeah, fair. But behind Brody.
I'd have Brandstrom behind all of them. Yeah. So I probably would go Zub. Yeah, Brody, Zub. Split. Let's go with McCabe, Liljegren, then Brandstrom.
And we forgot to say Travis Hamonick's actually 1-1.
Well, where are you putting John Klingberg?
The Hammer. Oh, yeah. John Klingberg, if you played 3-on-3 hockey, he would be all-time fun. Like he's high event. Like that's what he is, but is the pain worth the reward?
Yeah, this is a conversation for a Locked On Sens, Locked On Leafs crossover. So
well, we do say this is the Battle of Ontario edition.
True.
As mad as it may make some. You see the way we talked about the Petrie trade, apparently that we're like, why the heck is a Leafs fan and a Sens fan talking about Jeff Petrie? Well, it's the Eastern Conference edition of Locked On NHL.
That would be why. That would be why. It's our job to touch on everything that happens in the Eastern Conference.
That's right.
We are legitimate multitaskers when it comes to the National Hockey League.
But we do appreciate all the comments, whether you agree with us or disagree. Always appreciate the different points of view. So let us know who is too high, who is too low in the NHL Network's list of top defensemen. And if you want to weigh in, if you're a listener of Locked On Leafs, Locked On Senators, you want to weigh in on the Battle of Ontario decor, if you could make a top 6, who would it be? Leave those in the comments below on YouTube. You can also subscribe wherever you download your podcast. We just talked about a whole lot of defensemen. The one common denominator, they're all signed to contracts, but there are some young players who are still waiting to ink their next deals. We'll discuss why a former first overall pick, among others, still do not have contracts and more. You're listening to the Locked On NHL podcast. Welcome back to Locked On NHL, your team every day. Shout out to the everydayers out there that join us on YouTube and wherever you get your audio podcasts. I'm Ross Levitan. You can listen to me 5 days a week on Locked On Senators alongside Mike DiStefano from over on Locked On Maple Leafs. Alexis Lafreniere, Shane Pinto, the most notable forwards in the Eastern Conference, still without a contract. If you expand to the West, Trevor Zegras needs one. Defenseman, Jamie Drysdale, Evan Bouchard. Is this a large number to you at this time of year? Because I know we always have some stragglers, but this feels like a pretty impressive crop, if not by numbers, by ability.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I am being prisoner of the moment. I suppose we'd have to kind of go back, but my, recent memory, I can't remember this many, high caliber players. We had Trevor Zegras, Lafreniere, you've got Jamie Drysdale, Pinto, Evan Bouchard, Morgan Frost, Kalen Addison. Like, there's some pretty decent players, some quality players, some star players in the case of Trevor Zegras and Evan Bouchard even, who have yet to sign their contracts. I'm a little, getting a little antsy if I'm fans of those teams and not able to get these players under contract because training camp's, 2-3 weeks away.
Alexis Lafreniere, guess the contract. Like, what's this guy waiting for? Doesn't it feel like a short term, like prove it 2-year bridge contract where it's like, hey, by the end of these 2 years, if it doesn't work out, maybe we can look at finding you a fresh start. Still at 39 points. I know he's like kind of an easy butt of the joke, at least in my neck of the woods with Tim Stützle putting up 90 points. I know it's not there yet, but like there are signs that it's not like he's a complete bust. He's still finding his 21 years old.
His problem is like he just hasn't been able to get the ice time. Like you look at, he's averaging just a little over 15 minutes of ice per game. Like, for a guy who you look at as a potential top line player, 3 years into his career, you want to see a little bit more ice time than that. And I just don't know if he's going to see that in New York. Like he's kind of buried behind a few different guys. And then instead of giving him opportunity, they went and they traded for Tarasenko. They traded for Patrick Kane this past deadline, which just kind of pushed him down a little bit more, gave him some less, time out there to produce. They got a new coach there now. So I'll be curious to see, would they bring in Laviolette, I believe? I'll be curious to see if Laviolette can kind of unlock something new out of this kid. Because, man, remember at the draft, like he was supposed to be one hell of a player. Like when the Rangers won the lottery, that felt like a big time lottery win. He was a surefire, first overall pick and was going to be a no doubter, big time player. And it just hasn't quite been that for him. I'm not sure what the contract really would be for a guy like this. Like, I mean, you'd have to probably go back and look and see what did Nail Yakupov signed for on his second contract. I wouldn't imagine a whole lot. Maybe $2 million, maybe could be the number for Lafreniere. Like,
Are
I
you
know
comparing him to another former first overall pick on purpose? That's
I
so.
mean, I'm just saying, like, he's not that bad. I don't think he's going to flame out the same way that Yakupov did. But if you're looking at a contract comparable, that is another former first overall pick that struggled throughout the entire duration of the ELC. And when it came up for renewal, he didn't prove that he was ready for a big contract. And I don't think Lafreniere's done that either.
I think that the Edmonton Oilers made a mistake giving Nail Yakupov 2 years, $2.5 million AAV out of
I
his.
could see Lafreniere getting that, though. I could see it, just like the stigma. Like, he's a first overall pick. Could they really? Like, I don't know. I feel like he will hold out for $2 million, somewhere in that realm.
Well, after Yakupov had 8 goals in 60 games in his third year, 23 points, whereas Lafreniere's closer to 40 points. That said, I would like to see the kid line broken up under Laviolette. Like, I know that it's a cute name with Hagel and Kakko and Lafreniere, but Lafreniere and Panarin have actually played really well together. They were shooting nearly 60% Corsi last season in in only 170 minutes together, whereas he played 660 minutes at 5-on-5 with Capo Kakko, who was also a young player that struggled. So I'd like to see Lafreniere, moved up.
What did Capo get? Hold on. What Capo get last year? What's Capo making?
That's a great question.
Because that would actually be a good indicator, because that's a very similar situation with the exact same general manager.
$2.4 million, or sorry, that's his salary is 2.4, 2 years, 2.1. And worth noting in this conversation as well, the New York Rangers have 2.27 million in cap space with only Lafreniere left to sign. So I would just say 1 year, $2 million. And it's like, hey, play better under a new coach and you'll get your 3x3 or whatever it is.
Yeah, well, come back next year and, kick it down the curb a little bit.
I think his win in terms of negotiating this summer is having a new coach, because he was kind of the guy who Gerard Gallant came under fire for not developing the right way. So very interesting there, Mike. We'll leave it at that for today's show. For more, you can go check out Locked On Maple Leafs, Locked On Senators. You can make Locked On Fantasy Hockey your next listen. Man, fantasy hockey renewals just came in the old inbox this week. So it's that time of year, and Mike and I will be here every Wednesday to walk you through everything on the Eastern Conference. Next, we'll leave it to power rankings and the Western Conference. If you missed it, the Western Conference power rankings coming up on Thursday. For Mike DiStefano, I'm Ross Levitan. This has been the Locked On NHL podcast, your team every day.